Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on your time zone. Welcome to CenterZip's webinar series. My name is Todd Chipman, VP of Professional Services at CenterZip. Before we get started, I'd like to go over some quick housekeeping. During the webinar, feel free to ask any questions through the chat box on your GoToWebinar window. We'll try to get to all of them as appropriate. The webinar topic will run about 45 to 50 minutes. Then we'll reserve the last 10 minutes to address all of your questions. Please note that the webinar is being recorded. Tomorrow you'll receive an email with a direct link to the recording and slides. With that covered, allow me to introduce today's topic, Go From Idea to MVP Fast, where Amy Jo will share with us the 3 surprising discovery techniques that 10x your innovation cycle. Amy Jo Kim is a world-renowned social game designer, community architect, and startup coach. She's helped thousands of entrepreneurs innovate faster and smarter with her Getting to Alpha programs. Her design credits include Rock Band, The Sims, eBay, Netflix, Cover Fashion, Indiegogo, New York Times, Ultima Online, Happify, Pley, and numerous startups. Named by Fortune as one of the top 10 influential women in games, Amy Jo pioneered the idea of applying game design to digital services and is well known for her 2000 book, Community Building on the Web. She holds a PhD in behavioral neuroscience from the University of Washington, along with a BA in experimental psychology, and is an adjunct game design professor at the USC School of Cinematic Arts. Her new book, Built to Evolve, explores how to bring game design, systems thinking, and lean agile principles together to drive 21st century innovation. Now over to you, Amy Jo.
Hey, it's great to be here. We are ready to roll. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Today, I'm going to share with you just a few specific and actionable tips that can get you to product market fit 10x faster and dramatically increase your odds of success. I'm really glad to be here. I'm really glad that you're here, took out the time from your day to join us and learn how to innovate faster and smarter. Can you relate to any of these things? Do you ever feel that you need to accelerate your early design process? And it's really tough to take all the feedback you're getting from your team, from your stakeholders, from your customers, from different customers, and know what to do with it. Do you ever find it challenging to take that great, compelling idea in your head, that vision, and turn it into a stripped-down MVP? Well, if you feel that way, you're not alone. I feel that way on every project I've ever worked on. All of us want to build things that matter and stop wasting time on the things that don't. Peter Drucker likes to say that there's nothing so useless as doing efficiently something that we shouldn't be doing. That's the essence of what Agile and Lean is all about, and it's the groundwork that we're talking about today. I'm Amy Jo Kim. I'm a game designer, an entrepreneur, and a startup coach. I've worked with some of the top brands, and I've worked from the early days on bringing multinational hits to life, things that change the landscape. Today, you're going to learn how to 10x your path to product market fit with game thinking. So what is game thinking? It's a combination of smart game design, agile and lean UX blended together, design thinking, which is really about customer-centric design and empathizing with your user first before you start building. And perhaps most importantly, systems thinking. If you're doing innovation in the 21st century and you're not building systems, something's wrong. Apps and web pages are morphing into systems, and that's the trend that we're all riding on. So game thinking is at the heart of that, and game thinking is also your path to faster, smarter innovation. Now, I didn't start off knowing this stuff. It took me a while, and I want to give you a glimpse into my journey, and perhaps you can find echoes of your own journey. I started off in social systems design. I was an engineer and a designer, and I worked with eBay designing and redesigning their core systems when they were first getting started. I moved on and worked on Ultima Online, a pre-World of Warcraft massively multiplayer game, putting their core systems into place, reputation and housing, and integrating it with the web. I wrote a book, Community Building on the Web, that I'm still known for, and is actually still used 16 years later. From this book, the most popular element was the community life cycle, going from visitor through novice and regular into leaders and elders. Every one of us who's ever been part of a community, a real community, knows this life cycle. Now that led me to working with this gentleman, Alex Rogopoulos, the CEO of a hot gaming startup. I met with him in my house in Half Moon Bay, and he told me about a crazy idea he had, that people with no musical talent playing plastic instruments could actually feel like they were in a band. We brought that idea to life. Well, a lot of people told us we were crazy and nobody would actually pay for it. That game turned into Rock Band, which is a worldwide hit and still being developed now in VR. Working on that game taught me that when you want to go after a large addressable market, you first need to win the hearts of your early passionate customers. We brought that game to life, not with our target market, but with the people that were music game nerds, that we knew we had to grow beyond, but they were key to the early days of testing and tuning the game. Now this led me into working with this gentleman, Will Wright, who has developed The Sims, SimCity, and changed the landscape of gaming. Will knew how to work with early passionate customers. And when we were working on The Sims 3 years before it shipped, Will gathered together a group of simulation nerds that he really used to test the earliest, ugliest versions of the product. The first year was a series of small high-learning experiments, world-building experiments that looked nothing like the Sims you know today, but were crucial to making that innovative hit come to life. From that, I learned that you really need to focus your earliest efforts on prototyping, testing, and tuning your core loop, your core learning loop, the bit of experience that has the most value. We'll get more to that in a moment. I moved on and worked on many projects, including 2 breakthrough hits, Covet Fashion and Happify, which I'll tell you more about in a moment. I was also able to work with well-known brands, redesigning mission-critical parts of their games and services. Along the way, I launched my own venture-funded startup with my partner, Photograph. That was an amazing ride. We built an award-winning game. It was beautiful. We brought it to life. The first 2 weeks of the experience were amazing. But we had a lot of pressure from our VCs to go big and do a platform play. And we weren't able to cross the chasm into mainstream popular use. All was not lost. We sold that startup to a larger competitor, learned a lot from working with them. But one of the other things we learned that I want to share with you today is the importance of capturing your early adopters, your early market, and really understanding them and delighting them before trying to cross over into mainstream acceptance and grab that early majority. And in order to do that, you don't need beautiful, slick onboarding and an award-winning new product. You need to scope down, prototype and test your ideas uncomfortably early in tight relationship to those early adopters and not worry about making it pretty and making it grow big and fast. So a few years later, I met this gentleman, Renan Lockman, the CEO of Pley, a startup in the collaborative consumption space that rents Lego sets and high-end toys. They wanted to develop a new community to make their service stronger. They didn't want to cannibalize their service, and they wanted help understanding what kind of community their members would actually want to participate in. So we used the Game Thinking Toolkit, which is an amalgamation of everything I learned working on these hit games, seeing what worked, and also seeing what failed. And we were able, in 5 weeks, to test an idea, find out it was wrong, get new ideas from the right target customers, build an MVP, test the MVP, tweak it, and relaunch it all in 5 weeks. That was amazing, and since then, I've been developing this game thinking toolkit into a step-by-step system that accelerates product innovation. And you're going to hear some about that today. This system is based on the habits and practices of breakthrough innovators, the stuff that actually works. And an introduction to this toolkit is based on the 3 powerful techniques that underlie all the rest of the details. The first is to find and leverage your superfans, then expand out from that base. It's not just me who thinks this. That Paul Buckheit, who runs Y Combinator, likes to say, try to create something just a few people really love, even if most people don't get it right away. That's very different than trying to grow fast and reach the mainstream. In 1991, Jeffrey Moore wrote a book called Crossing the Chasm about his experiences with the 2 Steves and their hobbyist Apple computer, turning that into a mainstream hit. He called that Crossing the Chasm. What fewer people know is that that work was based on the work of this gentleman, Everett Rogers, a scientist at Bell Labs. In 1961, 30 years earlier, he wrote a paper called Innovation Diffusion Theory based on data he had collected over 5 years of how innovation actually spreads in cultures. The punchline is that real innovation spreads through the early market. It does not leapfrog the early market. You cannot avoid capturing your early market first if you want to have a successful innovation. So if you want to cross that chasm, if you want to succeed, capture your early market first. Now what I've seen is that the very best entrepreneurs understand this, probably intuitively. Find and delight a few passionate early customers. That's what Will Wright was doing with his simulation nerds. He understood that wasn't the target market. He understood these were the people that were going to help him bring the game to life. That's what the Rock Band team was doing with those music gaming nerds. The second principle is to build and test your core product experience from the inside out. Now, what does this mean? This means that you want to build a loop. Dan Cook, who is a game designer that I learned a lot from, likes to say, in a loop, you're updating your mental model and learning a new skill. That's what leads to player delight. So think about, first, what's my customer's end-to-end experience? How does it evolve over time? You remember the community lifecycle I showed you earlier. This is a stripped-down and simplified version of this, called the player's journey. The first phase is discovery. Discovery is the visitor experience. That's where someone's understanding the value proposition and you're planting the seeds for the mental model that they'll be updating later. Onboarding is an arc. Onboarding is, I'm new here. How do I learn the ropes? How do I start getting value? It may not have a clear ending, but onboarding is where you're climbing a ladder to learn just enough that you can start getting value. Habit building is different. Habit building is your 21-day experience, your 30-day, your 60-day experience. It's what is the thing that pulls you back once you've learned the ropes? And even more importantly, what is it that you're getting better at? How is it that this experience is opening up new opportunities, new challenges, new ways to engage, building new relationships? And then there's mastery. Mastery is something that's pretty much missing from most customer lifecycle diagrams, but it applies every bit as much to app building and service building as it does to games. Mastery is about leveraging the skills and knowledge and relationships that you've built. Mastery is about opening up earned powers and privileges. So if you want to ask yourself, what's the fastest path to a high-learning MVP? I want to be lean. I want to be agile. What is it? Well, this is a good start. We all know it's not that first one. It's not building the parts. It's actually building something super stripped down that works for the intended purpose. So with that in mind, back to our idea, we're bringing your product to life from the inside out. Should your MVP be a fake landing page? Does that make sense? A lot of people will tell you it is. Fake landing page is the best MVP. However, if you've been paying attention, you know a fake landing page tests discovery. It just tests your marketing message, which is great. That's a good thing to test. That has nothing to do with testing your product experience or validating it, and that's fooled a lot of people. Now, there's something else called an operant conditioning loop, or a Skinner box. If you've read The Power of Habit or Hooked by Nirial, you see that they're both based on this cue, routine, reward loop, which is an operant conditioning loop. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of games use that, particularly gambling games. But if you want to build long-term engagement, that's fundamentally about behavioral manipulation. And that's not going to lead to player delight. What's missing is the things that Dan Cook was talking about, updating your mental model, learning a new skill. That's not part of operant conditioning. For that, you need a skill-building system. You need something that's built to support learning and mastery, something that makes your customers better than they were before, makes them more awesome. And in gaming, there's something that most games have to have in order to do this, which is a learning loop or a core loop. It's called different things. It's a skill-building habit loop. There's a repeatable, pleasurable activity at the core. Remember, this is your day 21 experience. That's triggered not by an external trigger, but by some internal or situational trigger. We'll get more to that in a moment. You need some sort of simple feedback system that lets the person know, lets your customer know if they're getting better at this core activity they're there to do. And you need progress and investment layered in. Often that comes later. It's come later in every game I've worked on. But to make there be a path to mastery, you want to light the way with progress and investment and engage triggers. So ask yourself, when you're starting to build your MVP, not what exactly is the beautiful onboarding I want to build, but what's that hook, that day 21 experience, that core bit of value that's going to keep people coming back? How can I prototype that? Third point, tinker and prototype and assume that your first idea might not be right. I cannot emphasize how important this is if you want to succeed at innovation. Linus Pauling, a Nobel-winning scientist who knows a thing or two about innovation, likes to say the best way to have a good idea is to have lots of ideas. That doesn't mean that you should just have lots of bad ideas and throw them against the wall to see what sticks. But it means that you should be not too attached to any one idea so that you'll be open to feedback as you iterate towards success. There's a very well-established model called the stage gate model in business innovation that pretty much lays this out. It's a series of stages, scoping stages, with gates where projects are killed or let through depending on how good they look at that stage. Now here's a diagram that Dan Cook, who you met earlier, the game designer, uses for his successful indie game development studio to develop their ideas. They start up at the highest stage with lots of little ideas, and they build tiny little experiments of various kinds. Some of them involve, they're just tech experiments. Some of them involve testing with some of those early adopter types I told you about. And then there's a gate. And not all the ideas get through, only the best ones do. And again until they decide what to ship. So you can't boil the ocean. You can't do everything at once. So if you want to 10x your innovation speed, what should you test when? This diagram, the Game Thinking Roadmap, is your guideline. If you're a product manager or you want to just put on your product manager hat right now, if you're a product owner, this will save you enormous amounts of time. The x-axis is the customer's journey, what we just talked about, from discovery through onboarding, habits, and mastery. The y-axis is our journey, the developer's journey. We somehow start with MVP, prototype. We move into beta testing. We have a launch. It's for everybody. And then if it's successful, there's expansion. You know, systems these days are built to evolve. It's not just you're launched and you're done. Those days are over in digital systems. So let's look at how Slack handles this and how they put things into how they tested and evolved. One more thing before I move off of this chart. What I want you to notice is that the circles and the size and complexity of the circles represent where your development efforts go. During your MVP, bring your product to life from the inside out. Focus on that core bit of value, that core loop. Just enough onboarding to get people into it. As you get to beta, you want to develop your onboarding more while continuing to develop your core loop. At launch, you're going to really need to beef up discovery, get people in the funnel, etc. This is how really good game developers create their hits. And it's this that's going to save you a lot of time if you want to build long-term engagement. Okay, so for Slack, Slack started life as a multiplayer online cooperative game called Glitch that was being built by a distributed team. When that game failed financially, Stuart Butterfield, the CEO, noticed that the distributed team had built an in-house tool to communicate and to effectively do their work developing this game. So they took that in-house tool, turned it into Slack, and the rest is history. So Slack had 3 years of developing their core loop before they launched. They weren't doing anything other than just using the tool. But Slack has a very stripped down and coherent customer journey. It's one of many reasons that Slack feels good to use and is successful. Let's take a look at it. The discovery phase is really for visitors. And that's where Slack shines at social discovery. You hear about it. The word of mouth is amazing. People pull you in. You got to try this. Oh, hey, I made my own little Slack channel for planning this event. Will you come in? People are in multiple Slack channels. They're figuring out how to manage that. Slack is all about social discovery, and that's very game-like, much more so than traditional IT tools. So in that way, Slack is more like Minecraft than Yammer. Slack also has an onboarding that's game-like. In Slack, which is a multiplayer cooperative experience, you start your onboarding with a single-player mode where a friendly, helpful bot is teaching you the ropes, getting you to practice typing things in, telling you just a few things to get you going before releasing you into the multiplayer environment where people know more than you. And any of you who have ever played a console game, a strategy game, or some shooters have probably played a training level with those same dynamics. And in that way, Slack is game-like, but not gamified. It's just good design that makes you feel, hey, I'm being taken care of, and now I feel ready for the next thing. In Slack, habit building is really built around customization. Like an onion, Slack reveals its layers of customization the more you peel it back. First, you learn how to use text, then you learn about there's emojis, you learn the emojis, then you find out there's some custom emojis just for your group, and maybe there's a custom greeting, and interact with the bot a little bit more. It gets more and more customized. And then, as you head toward mastery, the customization goes into launching your own channel, maybe programming up your own bot, or even integrating your app with Slack's API. So in Slack, customization and making Slack your own is the through line. It runs through the entire experience. So if you want to build a product that people come back to, create an experience that gets better as your customers become more skilled at using it. And start by solving a real problem for a small group. Don't try to make the ultimate tool for all millennials. Start, you can aspire to that, but you have to start with something very specific that works for a small, high-need group of people. So let's look at the core loop, that learning loop in Slack. The engaging activity is reading and responding to updates, and the urge that it satisfies is fear of missing out, or FOMO. You want to stay up to date. By putting all your work and all your communications in one place, you better darn stay up to date, especially if you're the team lead. So the internal trigger is really built into it. The simple feedback in Slack is very similar to email. I've read my messages. I'm done. You know, there was a red thing, now there's not. So that's simple but very effective. And the progress and investment is all about customization. You make progress in Slack by customizing it. You don't make progress with some progress bar that doesn't really mean anything. You make progress by learning how to customize it. You make progress by just using the tool effectively. And that's what makes you more invested. There's few things that are as good for getting people invested in something as customization. And then there's an engage trigger. So an engage trigger is a special kind of external trigger. A notification is an external trigger. Leaving your shoes by the door to remind you to go running is an external trigger. Leaving a sticky on your front door to remind you to get the milk on your way home is an external trigger. But there's a special kind of external trigger in digital systems called engage. Those triggers only kick in when someone is engaged in the system and cares about it. Stats are a good example. So in Twitter, you're not going to be checking your Twitter stats unless you're sharing and getting, retweets and likes, because that's what you come back to check. So in Slack, the engage triggers your notifications, and Slack encourages you to customize your notifications to make sure that they can pull you back in a way that's consistent with Slack's through line, which is customization. So if you want to build long-term engagement, start by iterating and learning about and polishing with your core audience that core learning loop, that bit of engagement that's going to pull people back on day 21. And use the game thinking roadmap to help you know what to build when, and to help remind you and your team and explain to them how you can build and test this first without losing track of the other phases of your product experience. One more quick case study. Happify is a really interesting case who used these principles to absolutely 10x their product innovation. I met the two founders over lunch one day in San Francisco. They're two gaming executives from Israel, and they had sold their company and were thinking about what to do next, and had a transformative experience by taking a class on the science of happiness. They wanted to bring that to a game. They wanted to bring it to the masses in the form of a game. They thought a lot about who their early adopters were. Their first idea was entrepreneurs like them, male entrepreneurs kind of between gigs. For various reasons, that wasn't quite right. And they also thought about people recently diagnosed with depression, and that turned out to have liability issues they didn't want to get into. But then, doing a lot of testing, very simple, quick testing, we stumbled onto a really interesting high-need group. Stay-at-home moms who had recently had their first kid and had been professional and were kind of feeling a little empty and lost and not sure what to do, but really wanted to be excellent, loving, happy moms. Those people turned into a dynamite early adopter group that we were able to leverage. And by doing that, we used these 5 key discovery questions that I'll be going into in detail in our next webinar. We used that to hone in on these people and learn what they wanted. And once we had gathered them together, we put them in a community and started showing them weekly play tests and weekly screenshots and weekly mock-ups of our development, which really speeded things up. During this process, we showed them the mock-ups that the two entrepreneurs, Tomer and Ofer, had made of their first idea, which was very game-like. It sort of looked like a tower defense game. And these people said, that looks really stressful. And we said, what do you love? What makes you feel calm? And they said, Pinterest. We love Pinterest. We love to, and we learned all about this by being in a conversation with them, not just by interviewing them once. And so we rejiggered the whole UX architecture to work more like a Pinterest stream, and the whole thing took off. Today, Happify is the market leader in digital happiness, with a major brand extension launching that's targeted at hospitals and doctors.
Amy Jo?
Yes.
We have a question from one of our listeners. He asked,
Hey.
how can I convince my team to think like a scientist and develop products with game thinking if they're used to a slower development process?
That's a great question. Could we only have a few more slides.
Well,
So
sure.
it'd be great if we could hold that to the end. Okay, thanks. So let's talk about you now. What if you could accelerate your product development, talk with exactly the right customers early on, know who to listen to and exactly who to ignore, take those insights, turn them into a compelling, simple MVP that's testable, and do all of that while designing your product for long-term engagement? If you use these 3 techniques as your groundwork, you will be on the path to doing all of those things. Find and leverage your superfans and expand from that base, using innovation diffusion theory to remind you why it's so important. Build and test your core product experience from the inside out. Don't get seduced by fancy onboarding. Really start by finding the bit of value and experimenting until you do. Tinker, prototype, and assume your first idea might not be right. Make sure you're not too in love with your idea and so in love with it that you miss that feedback from your customers that tells you whether or not it's actually going to work. So if you're ready to supercharge your product design and put these ideas into practice, we offer a number of programs to help you do this. So go ahead to gettingtoalpha.com/programs. Check that out. If you want updates, there's places you can sign up for updates. We have some exciting things coming up. You can also follow me on Twitter. I share a lot of free information. If you want to be notified about that, you can sign up at amyjokim.com, which is my blog. And if you have a burning question, you can reach out directly at ajk@gettingtoalpha.com. So, Todd, I want to do the overview of CenterZip. Would you like to do that now, and then do the questions, or do some questions first and then do the overview?
Let me start, and then we can get enough questions during the rest of the presentation.
Great.
We'll be able to review those at the end. So let's start off with, where to go?
So the first question you asked was, how can I convince my boss?
That's correct.
Yes. So that's a really good question, and it can be tough. One of the things that is critical for corporate innovation to work is a lot of support and success from stakeholders. Without that and without understanding, it's just not going to work. So what I found works best is, one, you educate your boss. So, webinars like this, thank you CenterZip for hosting. Other stuff I share, I'm sure CenterZip shares useful stuff, white papers. So most people that have succeeded at this start with a program of education where they don't overwhelm the boss, but they just start feeding the boss things that make him look smart, that he can embrace, and basically go on an education program. The second thing that's helpful is to have some sort of event that educates not just the boss but other people, gives them shared language, and gets them to actually feel like they're doing productive work together. And sometimes I've seen groups go to, say, the Lean Startup Conference or another conference. I do in-house workshops for companies with that as the intent, that sort of thing. But with a boss, sometimes I'll work with a team for 3 months under the radar, and then we'll have a big event that's really about getting the boss on board, and we make the boss look really smart at the event and educate the boss just enough that he can get up there and give an introduction and sound really smart, like the whole thing was his idea. So you basically make the boss think it was his idea in a nutshell. But you do that by implanting him. I mean, it's just really smart bosses will like that. Now, that doesn't solve the problem of what it takes in terms of organizational support to make it happen. If you have a one-day event and then you don't have the actual support for the next 3 months, 6 months to implement the process, then it won't work. So you actually need that. And again, one of the things that we do at Getting to Alpha is we have a 3-month team-based program for implementing all these ideas that's directed at corporate innovation labs. And the key thing there is, don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to change your whole department. Do a pilot project. So the third pillar of this with events and education is pilot project. Pick a small winnable project and say, look, it's an experiment. Give us 3 months, give us 6 months, whatever it is, your time frame, and let us put these ideas into practice with your blessing, and it's a pilot, and then we'll come back and we'll tell you what we learned, what the results are, and we'll decide together if we want to spread that further in the organization. That's also been very effective at getting things done.
Fantastic. And I'd like to encourage everyone else in the audience to enter your questions in the chat box. We're getting quite a few of them here, and we'll go through them once we're finished with this next part. Amy Jo, can you forward the slides?
Sure.
Yeah, we recovered though. So I just want to say that CenterZip has been a development partner for literally hundreds of companies over the past 12 years. And whether you're a billion-dollar company or a startup, we can get your product out to market quickly with a very robust feature set. And let's face it, technology is always changing, and it's difficult to keep up to obtain competitive advantage. From machine learning to IoT, our developers are constantly being trained on the latest software technologies. And of course, we don't have to be in a recession to enjoy cost savings. Our customers tend to save over 50% on their development costs partnering with us. So there's a really tremendous value in having a co-partner in your development. Next. Thank you. Here's just a snapshot of some of the current and past clients. As you can see, it's kind of a who's who of software companies. And we have actually written the software applications of some startups that were acquired by very large companies. So we have an incredible track record working with small startups all the way to Fortune 500 companies. Next slide. And next month, I just wanted to let you know that we have our webinar, and it's going to be on offshore outsourcing demystified, and that will be on November 16th. Okay, and here's just some more contact information for CenterZip and where you can get the latest information about us. So it looks like we had some more questions roll in while I was speaking. Let's see. Here's a good one. You mentioned the power of building a super fans community. How can I learn how to actually do that? Do you have more specific tips and guidance?
Yes, I do. There's a pretty detailed set of steps you can follow. But at the high level, there's really three ingredients you need. One is you need vetted superfans, meaning it's not just your friends and family, it's not just, you know, people your VC knows. It's really vetted, filtered people that are specific to your the product you're bringing to life and that you want to test. The second ingredient is you need a communication tool that's familiar to them that they will actually use to set up the group. Sometimes it's WhatsApp, sometimes it's Kik, sometimes it's Facebook, sometimes it's just an email list. I've seen all of those work. But the key thing there is it has to be something that your audience will use. I've had clients who wanted to use a Facebook group because some consultant told them that, you know, every customer community should be in a Facebook group, and they had people that just hated Facebook and wouldn't use it. So their community failed. So you have to use a tool they'll actually use. And then the third ingredient is the way you need to lightly manage it, specifically to get product value out of it. And that's, I'm going to be offering through ShuffleBrain a webinar. Actually, it's another joint webinar with the Gaming Business Review. We're going to be offering a webinar coming up soon, and if anybody is interested, follow me on Twitter and sign up for updates at amyjokim.com, and you'll learn all about that webinar. But I'll be promoting it, and perhaps in a follow-up, the CenterZip folks can also send out a link to anyone who's interested, and I will be laying out in detail exactly how you build. That's the topic of the next webinar. So thanks for asking.
Oh, perfect. Susanna asks, testing with mock prototypes is much cheaper than building software. When do you decide to start building and transitioning to testing with software rather than prototype?
That's a really great question. So first of all, it depends on what you're doing. Like there's no one answer, but the clearer that you are about the hypothesis you're testing with each of your product experiments, the better you'll be at answering that question. So the answer to that question really comes out of a combination of, one, what your time frame is, and two, what that means your constraints in terms of time, and two, how much uncertainty you have about various aspects of your product market fit. For example, if you're really pretty clear, like let's say that you're like Pley, who I talked about earlier, and you're developing an extension to your existing product. You're developing a major new feature, rather than a brand new thing. You don't have very much risk factor in who your target market is, who your target audience is. You know who that is. And you can get to them pretty easily. That's not a high risk factor. You don't need to do a lot of testing and prototyping of that. You do have a lot of risk and unsureness about what kind of community they would actually use. In the Pley example, that was the riskiest thing, because there was an assumption that we'll just make like this text community with a message board and we'll engage them and they'll love it. And it turned out when we did some early research with prototypes, they hated it. They said, not another community, it feels like a burden, I'm not going to do that, that looks like you just, But there was something they really wanted, which was educational videos for their kids to keep them busy and engaged in a sort of family-friendly way. They wanted that. So Pley ended up building a community around that. When did we go to software? Well, we did mock-ups, we did sketches, we tested, and then we were going to build software and we said, wait a minute, we can just make a YouTube channel for our MVP. So we made a YouTube channel. And then a year later, they actually built some of the functionality into software. But the reason I'm telling you the story is because each of those steps was tied to uncertainty and like the fastest way to learning. So if, I have another client who runs a game development studio for educational games, and they bid on contracts that might have, say, a 9-month period. And in that case, you have to start going to software in like month 5, maybe month 4. But before that, it's all scoping, which is basically small high learning experiments. And that's determined by, you got to go to software because there's, I have a client. Some people have to ship by Christmas, and so you either miss Christmas or not. So those are the factors that in reality determine when you go to software. But I would say you go to software when you've learned what you need to learn based on the way you set up your product experiments from testing with prototyping. If you can learn more that is high-risk stuff from testing with prototypes, then you should keep testing with prototypes. A lot of times they go on in parallel. Like there's prototype testing for the UX while the team is building out big chunks of the back end, for instance, in software.
Very good. Okay, Dave asks, can it be useful to start with a small group of friends? I sometimes worry about getting unbiased feedback from people I know.
That's a good worry. You should be worried about that because you will never, ever, ever get unbiased feedback from people you know. You just won't. You can start with a small group of friends because if you want to, what are the reasons to start with a small group of friends? One, maybe you want to practice your prototyping and, user research chops and you want to just like try showing them a prototype and, eliciting feedback from them. That would be a reason to do it. Maybe you think you and your friends have a use case and a need that has a greater applicability. That would be another reason to do it. The key thing is you don't stop there and you take it as a cohort. It's a cohort, meaning a group of people with something specific in common that you can treat in a unified way with your statistics. But it should never be the only cohort you test on. So you should say, okay, well, my friends, they're a cohort and they think this, and I got this result. Now, let me think about like a high-need early customer cohort that's not my friends and see if I can pull those together and do a little bit more rigorous testing with my prototypes or my early build and compare that. Then it's fine. But like I've seen it go wrong a lot. I'm a mentor at a number of incubators. One of them is a hardware incubator called Highway 1. And I was working with a guy, a team, and they were being pressured to like grow big and do manufacturing and get their like big launch plan. And in private, he told me, he said, you know, before I came here, all I did was test this on my friends. And I'll be really honest with you, I wish I hadn't, because I'm seeing all these problems now with like real customers. And I really, really, really wish I hadn't just tested it on my friends. So I was like, well, you know, good mistake not to make in the future.
Very good. Bob asks, what types of projects do these techniques work for? Does this work in enterprise? What about healthcare or insurance?
Yes, it works in all of those. I actually have clients in all of those who have used this very well. A very, very large California-based insurance company recently used these techniques to diagnose, fix, and refine an early version of their telematics system. And they used it to actually synthesize a bunch of customer feedback and then design a bunch of experiments that led to a much, much better product, but also a better marketing campaign. They used the results of it in their marketing campaign and in all their messaging, which was also very useful. The Happify example was in healthcare, and I've also worked with Basis, the the watch, and other sort of digital healthcare companies. And one of my very best students in my master class, which is an online 8-week version of this coaching program, launched an enterprise data processing company where she leverages training up people in third world countries like Haiti and Cambodia to do sort of the grungy data migration tasks in SaaS applications. And she used this to test and develop who her market was and how the whole thing would work. And she also used it to be able to get enough going that she quit her job. And she recently told me she's making 3 times what she made as an employee of a SaaS company and running her own company and continuing to use these to develop her products. So it can work in enterprise.
Tremendous. And finally, we have a question from Lisa. We're just getting used to Agile. How is this different?
This is Agile. Embraces Agile, but Agile is a way to build things. This tells you if you're building the right thing. And it tells you who you're building it for. So this informs Agile with design thinking and game design and systems design by telling you not just let's build quickly, but incorporating product vision and product strategy into it.
Fantastic. Well, Amy Jo, we've actually answered all the questions that were submitted, so I think this is a wrap.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Amy Jo, for all your time and information.